Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We're your co-hosts. Look who has risen from the dead and come back to join the podcast. No more solo podcasts from my car. No more listening to me ramble for 50 minutes on any given episode. RJ is back to bring balance to the podcast. Welcome back, RJ.
Yes, sir. I want to apologize. Quick apology. Moving into college in the dorm right now. Life has been hectic, but I've been feeding for a Believe in Georgia Tech podcast, and now we're back. And now football is just around the corner. Week 0 is behind us, and week 1 is this weekend. So got a lot of football to talk about, and I'm so excited.
Absolutely. Well, maybe they'll forgive you for being upset. Maybe they'll forgive you. And we have a special guest, as always. Going back to last year, we try to bring on team experts, guys that know more than we do about the programs that Georgia Tech's about to face. And there's nobody better than Colorado on SI Buffalo's reporter, Jack Carlough. Me and him are teammates at on SI. He does a fantastic job. Jack, thank you for joining the show today.
Thank you, Jackson. Thank you. Yeah, excited to be on. Finally football season, and ready to talk about Friday's matchup. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. This is one of the best games of week 1, just because it can have big ramifications. There's a lot of different ways it could go. There's unknowns on both teams. We're going to get into all that. But before we do, just, our regular stuff, if you guys are watching this on YouTube and haven't subscribed yet to the channel, would love it if you would do that. We're nearing 1,000 subscribers. We're almost there. I know there's going to be a lucky guy out there, guy or girl out there that pushes us over 1,000, and we really appreciate that. Like the video, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. That would be fantastic. Leave us a review. We love reading you guys' reviews and telling us all about the show. So I guess let's dive into it. So it is finally game week. On my season preview pod last week, I kind of did a little overview of the Colorado game. I gave my prediction early, so everybody knows what I think about the result of the game. I didn't really dive too deep into it, and that's because I knew I wanted to have Jack on, because Jack knows more about Colorado than me and RJ combined. Like I've been reading a lot about them, obviously, over at Colorado on SI, and they do a great job over there. So I guess let's start off with just we got to talk about quarterbacks. We know who Georgia Tech is going to be trotting out, the same guy they've been trotting out for the past few years. But it wasn't out. Deion Sanders announced today that Caden Salter is going to be starting for Colorado. It's kind of the worst kept secret. Like, everybody kind of assumed. Like, I thought there was, at least, because it went on for so long, and maybe you can give more insight into this, that maybe Julian Lewis was going to start. But
yeah,
Caden Salter is officially the guy. What can we expect from him? And I guess what can we expect from this offense? Because it's not just him replacing Shedeur. It's new starters on the offensive line, a brand new receiving core. You can start talking about the quarterbacks and just kind of give a little preview of what to expect from the offense as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, everyone knew that it was going to be Salter pretty much since he transferred from Liberty in December. But Coach Prime did say today that Julian Lewis might play a little bit on Friday, kind of depending on how the game goes. I'm not totally sold. Like, it would have to be like, a blowout, like one way or the other, for that to happen. And I just don't see that happening on Friday. I think it's going to be a close game. So I would expect to see Salter out there for at least like 90% of the offensive plays. But with Salter, he's a transfer from Liberty. He spent 4 years there. In 23 was his really good season for him. He went 13-0, won Conference USA. Wasn't quite as solid last year, partially because of just what he had around him at Liberty. But true dual threat quarterback. He's looked really good with his legs, at least in the videos we've seen at practice. He's going to make Georgia Tech's defensive ends have to play really disciplined. Arm strength, really good. Definitely not as probably accurate as what we saw at Shedeur. Few quarterbacks are in college football. But excited to watch him on Friday. Really, really strong group of wide receivers as well. Obviously, they lost Travis Hunter, LaJohntay Wester, Jimmy Horn Jr., and Will Shepard to the NFL. But still, they might not be as last year, but still a solid group. Amarian Miller's a big name to watch out wide, as well as Sincere Brown. I think those two guys will make life difficult on Georgia Tech's DBs. Also, the offense, just from watching what we've seen in fall camp, the run game will finally be a bigger factor in this offense. Didn't have a lot of success on the ground the past 2 years, but with Declan Taylor and Micah Welch, I think those two are kind of be the main featured backs on Friday. Curious to see how the run game will look, though.
RJ, you got to ask a question, man. Like my voice is wore out from these past few weeks.
Yeah, and I think the thing that you touched on first, I think pretty much everybody knew it was going to be Salter. But I will say, the closer and closer that it got, I was starting to think maybe they go to a 2-quarterback system. Maybe we see more than Lewis than we thought. But Salter's going to be the guy, and he's going from a Liberty offense to a Pat Shurmur offense where there's going to be a lot of play action, a lot of this, West Coast kind of style vibes, and I do think he's going to do well. But again, it's going to be an adjustment. You played in the Conference USA, and not going to diss against some of the schools in the Conference USA, but that is pretty much easily the worst conference in all of college football. I'd say it's much worse than the MAC, in my personal opinion. And he's going to have to take that step up. I think Georgia Tech can definitely give him trouble, and I think this is going to be, his biggest game in his career, pretty much. Besides, obviously, that Oregon game where they were completely manhandled, but that's a totally different story. I think he's on a very big stage. I honestly think Georgia Tech might be the bigger name, which is crazy after all of what we saw last year with Hunter and Shadur and Dion, and Colorado being, if not the number one biggest name in all of college football. Like, everybody cared about what Colorado was doing. Now they're a little bit out of that limelight. Georgia Tech, is kind of pushing themselves into there. So it's a very interesting position, but I think I don't want to say inexperienced, because Salter is a very experienced quarterback, but inexperience at the higher level, the Power 4 level, I think offers Georgia Tech a little bit of an edge, over Salter.
Yeah.
Fair.
Well, that's something I was going to ask Jack. Now, that's something, has that been talked about a lot? Is there any concern that you hear of, like, Salter's played, I think, maybe four Power 4 against 4 Power 4 opponents. Obviously, the Oregon game, he didn't play any last year. Played against Virginia Tech and Wake Forest in 2022. Is that like really a concern, or do you think he steps into this pretty seamlessly and is able to get going Friday?
I think he'll be okay. There was, I think earlier this month, he had some quote where he said, like, it's been a little bit of an adjustment period just with how much faster and how much stronger the defenders he's playing against are. So maybe early on it might be a little bit. Obviously, Georgia Tech's, you guys got a good size. Excited to see what you guys look on defense. But in terms of like experience and like football IQ, his ability to kind of soak in this new playbook, I don't think there's any concerns on that side. Again, it just might be like, that safety is going to be a step faster than what you saw in the Conference USA.
Yeah. So you made a point about the running game earlier, and I kind of wanted to go back to that because, like, when you just look at the stats, like, Colorado was not a good running team last year. They weren't really trying to run the ball a ton. Like, that was like they had an elite group of wide receivers that are all playing in the NFL currently. Shador is an NFL quarterback. Whatever your opinion of him was, like, he was a very good college quarterback, and he is in the NFL. So, but in this transfer portal day and age, like, I think it's different. Like, 10 years ago, I would have looked at it like, okay, well, Colorado was terrible running the ball last year. Like, how can you expect them to be any good at it this year? But there's so many new faces. Like, is there really an internal belief that, like, this is going to be a really good rushing attack compared to at least last year?
Internally, yes, 100%. There is a belief that they will be a lot better. And a lot of that is just a better offensive line too. Jordan Seaton, left tackle, he's the only returning starter on the group, but the 4 guys that they brought in, at least 4 projected starters, are all really solid. Excited to see Larry Johnson at right tackle. Both of CU's tackles. I think that will open up a lot in the run game, just with the style of backs that CU has. I think that will be important. But again, it's going to come down to the offensive line, which looks improved at least. We'll find out on Friday for sure. But yeah, overall, there is a commitment to wanting to run the ball more than what we saw the past 2 years.
Do you think it's just going to be those two back there, or do you think there's going to be 3 or 4 guys involved?
Coach said today it's going to be a 3-man rotation, so it'll be Micah Welch, Declan Taylor, and probably Simeon Price. He'll probably see the fewest amount of carries. It'll be those 3. CU's top running back, at least. I don't know. It's hard to say there's a top guy in that room, but Dallin Hayden will not play. He's not expected to play right now. He has like a hand injury. That's going to hurt a little bit. So it will just be those other 3 guys rushing the ball on Friday.
So you saw a lot of transfers overall for this team, but especially on this offensive line. Like, you got Xavier Hill from Memphis, you got Larry Johnson from Tennessee, you got the kid from Illinois. Who are you most excited to see on this offensive line? Because it's very much like a full rebuild, besides obviously Jordan Seaton returning.
Definitely Larry Johnson and Xavier Hill, as you said, from Memphis. I think those 2 guys are going to impress a lot. Right now, also, I'll mention this, at center, at least we're not sure who's going to start there. It's between Cooper Lovelace, transfer from Northwestern, and Zarian McGill, who's from Louisiana Tech. So that might be maybe potentially a weaker spot, kind of like in the middle. Those 2 guys, Zy Chrysler, as well as you mentioned, the transfer from Illinois. I'd expect him to start as well. I'll add also that CU has been a little banged up on the offensive line throughout fall camp. Not sure what that's going to look like on Friday. We're not going to get an injury report or anything because it's a non-conference game. But they might be out 1 or 2 guys. We'll see, kind of depending on how this week goes. Went a little off topic there, but Xavier Hill and Larry Johnson. Excited to watch those 2.
Absolutely. So just kind of finishing up with the receivers here. As we were talking about earlier, that was an elite group last year, one of the best in the country. Kind of, you mentioned some names there. One thing I noticed about them was they have a lot of size. Like, this is a really big wide receiver group. Kind of how big of, like, I'm sure you don't expect them to be as good as last year, but is the step back going to be really big? Is it just going to be kind of moderate, or could it be like a total drop off? Kind of like, what do you think from that group?
Yeah, if the run game really is better, then there'll be a decent drop off, obviously, because there's just not as many yards to get. They won't match last year's receiving numbers. At least it looks that way on the outside. We'll find out. But in terms of size, Amari Miller's huge. He's a junior. Draylon Miller's looking a lot bigger. He's kind of a slot guy, but he'll see some action. And also in the receiving room too, at tight end, Division II transfer Zach Atkins has looked really good. I think he'll play a role in just the receiving game as well. But just with how CU's offense is shaping up with having a dual threat quarterback and maybe a better running game, I wouldn't expect them to reach last year's receiving numbers.
So I take it. Do you think play action is going to be like a big thing here? Like Georgia Tech stopping the run, not allowing them to get the play action. I think that they're going to, like you're saying, trying to get a running game established and then taking a deep shot. Do you feel similarly there?
Yes. Play action is definitely a strength of Caden Salters. Obviously, CU didn't do a lot of play action the past 2 years, just without much of a run game. But it's going to be on Pat Shermer, the offensive coordinator, to actually implement that. And again, as you said, it depends on getting the rushing attack going early for the play action to actually work. But you're right. Yeah, that could totally be a strength if everything plays out well for Colorado.
So I guess to kind of tilt the focus towards Georgia Tech, and I guess I'll toss this off to RJ. What about Colorado's offense would worry you the most? Is there a matchup that kind of worries you when they face Georgia Tech, when these two sides of the ball are on the field?
Honestly, and again, I want to say this to the utmost respect of Colorado, but I feel like I feel like they're as equal of a threat on the run as they are in the pass game, but I don't think they're very much elite on both ends. I think the one thing that is good about this team is they have some very strong position groups on defense, which we'll talk about later. But if there is one thing that does worry me, and you touched on this a little bit, is their wide receiver room. They got a lot of big guys, a lot of very physical guys, and I think if this game is as close as we think it is, it's gonna come up to a couple of plays where you're gonna need one guy to go in and get you a score. And I think Colorado does have receivers that can go do that. You got Sincere Brown, you got Amarian Miller. I think they have a lot of guys that can go and win a game. And I think if the game comes down to that, that's where I would worry the most as a Tech fan.
So, I think I've said this a million times. I think I've wrote it about 150,000 times. I think the lines of scrimmage, it's always important. But you have Colorado basically has a brand new offensive line outside of Jordan Seaton, who is a legit All-American candidate. And then you have Georgia Tech, they have Jordan Vandenberg back. He is a first-team All-ACC type of guy. And then it's brand new. Braden Manley, the Mercer transfer, brand new. AJ Hoffler, Clemson transfer, brand new. Akilo Stone is technically new. I guess he's old and new. He played at Georgia Tech a few years ago, transferred to Ole Miss, and now he's back. They have Matthew Alexander, the transfer from UCF. There's just a lot of new faces on the defensive line, and it's just a question. I just have no idea. Whoever wins that matchup, that's just going to dictate so much, because Colorado's going to come out and try to test them and stop them run. And I think Jack made a great point about the defensive ends better be disciplined, because Caden Salter is an exceptional athlete. I don't think he's quite – I think him and Haynes King have some similarities in terms of athleticism and running ability, and you have to account for that, and that makes it that much tougher. But I'm fascinated by the line of scrimmage matchup. So I'll ask you, Jack, and then we'll kind of flip to the other side of the ball. Is there a matchup, or is there an area of concern that you have with Colorado's offense going against Georgia Tech's defense, or anything like that?
Yeah, I guess with the run game, you just got to prove it. We really got to prove it that you're actually better at running the ball than last year. Again, with 4 new faces on the offensive line, it's what they did at their old schools, but it's so hard to tell how it's going to look, playing alongside each other, pretty much a totally new group. But as you said, if there's some concern with what Georgia Tech's defensive line is going to look like, maybe that'll help Colorado a little bit if they're also kind of in the same boat. But yeah, I agree with it's going to come down to the trenches, especially early in the game, I think.
And we should highlight Georgia Tech has a first-year defensive coordinator, Blake Gideon. He was safeties coach at Texas. This is the first time we're going to get to see him. And I've said it again 1,000 times. I think Blake Gideon will be a pretty good coordinator, but I don't know. I thought Santucci would be a good D coordinator. You had a little bit more to go off of because he had been a defensive coordinator at Duke and did a really good job. That was Georgia Tech's strength last year, was stopping the run. Now, like we said earlier, 2 college football teams are it's not the same year to year. In this day and age, you're not the same. They have to prove they can still stop the run. Last year, it was pass rush and it was giving up explosive plays in the pass game. Teams with strong passing attacks really got Georgia Tech. That was the whole reason they lost to Syracuse. That wasn't the only reason, I guess, to say. But Kyle McCord had a field day because of all the weapons they had out there. I know they beat Miami, but Miami had a gajillion yards in that game because of Cam Ward and that passing attack. Some of the depth in the secondary was a concern, and that's why Georgia was able to come back a little bit in the second half because they were just losing bodies back there. So that's and this isn't even remotely a slight at Colorado. So nobody takes that context, but I don't know that you're going to learn about Georgia Tech's passing defense quite as much in this game as you are going to know about them, how disciplined they are. How good they are with assignments and how good they are at stopping run. I think this is where you're really going to find out. And that's not to say Colorado can't hit big plays in the pass game. I just don't think they. I don't expect them to be one of the elite throwing teams in the country. Would you say that's fair?
I guess as things are shaping up right now, that's fair. Still, a lot of question marks with what Caden can do with his arm. Talent's there at wide receiver for sure, but still getting to know Caden a little bit and what he's actually capable of doing as more of a pocket passer, I guess.
Yep. All right, so let's flip it to the other side of the ball real quick. I made the comparison in my season preview episode last week that Colorado's leap from 2023 to 2024 on defense was not all that dissimilar from Georgia Tech's. Both defenses were like atrocious in 2023, like just bottom of the barrel. It's just bad. Everybody remembers it was bad. Last year, they had obviously some issues. Like Colorado had some weaknesses. Georgia Tech's, obviously, I just highlighted those, but they made marketable improvements. Like Georgia Tech was one of the better run defenses in the country. Colorado was one of the most. I don't know that people realize how disruptive they were on defense last year. Like they led the Big 12 in sacks. They were really good in that area. And now you have a Georgia Tech offensive line that, you lose Weston Franklin and Jordan Williams, the center and right tackle, who had been here since like 2008, it felt like. You get some – now, when I say new starters, like these guys have played before. Like Ethan McKinney was a freshman All-American in 2023, dealt with some injuries last year. Harrison Moore played a lot last year. He's likely going to be the starter at center. And then you have Malachi Carney at right tackle, South Alabama transfer. And then you have one of the best guard tandems in the country with Joe Fusile and Keelan Rutledge. Keelan Rutledge was a second-team AP preseason All-American. He's as good as it gets in that area. But they're going to face a very formidable opponent. Like I have a lot of respect for what Colorado did on defense. Do you expect it to still be a very disruptive unit? And who are kind of the names to know on that front seven?
Yeah, so the defensive line. I'd also say similar to Georgia Tech, I would say last year's defense was, strong at stopping the run for the most part, except for one or two games. Strong at getting sacks, obviously, but giving up those big chunk plays was also an issue a lot last year. But yeah, looking at the D-line right now, I could give like top four guys. I think Arden Walker and either Quincy Wiggins or Sam Okunlola, they're going to be kind of the main edge guys right now. And then in the middle at the tackle spots, Anquin Barnes and Amari McNeil, two returners. They both had really good fall camps. Saw not like total, not like a lot of playing time last year, like a decent amount. But they weren't out there like every single play. So maybe a couple question marks there, at least on the interior of the defensive line. But Arden Walker, heard a lot of good things from him this fall camp. I think he's going to play a big role in obviously keeping Haynes King kind of in the pocket and not running too much. I think he'll play a big key on Friday night.
The mute button got me. I read a little bit of some new guys at the linebacker position. Mm-hmm. Do you view that is that either like a question mark, a weakness, or kind of how do you view that kind of coming in here?
Yeah, that might be another question mark. The two guys that are likely to start are Martavius French and Reggie Hughes. Right now, they're the two favorites. We'll see if anything changes. Both had really good years last year at smaller schools, but maybe a little undersized, possibly. We'll see what happens on Friday, but that could be tough going up against a guy like Haynes King, especially if Haynes King, if he gets out of the pocket and he starts using his legs a lot, that's going to be a tough day for CU's two linebackers there. And because the Buffs, they lost their two linebackers from last season who were both studs. It's a bit of a question mark right now. And also with depth too, there's not a ton behind those two guys right now, at least.
So, I got a question for you, Jack. Out of all the position groups, not even just defense and offense, would you venture to say, and I don't want to say worse, but I want to say, do you think the linebacker group is the position that worries you the most, especially coming into week one about this Colorado team?
Linebacker and maybe safety.
Okay.
Safety right now, they got Tawfiq Byard is going to be solid, but still want to see more from Carter Stoutmeyer. He's probably going to be the second safety there. Offensively, I don't have a ton of worries. But defensively, I would say safety and linebacker still, those guys are going to have to prove it early in the season that they're ready to be consistent and kind of impact players.
Yeah, like that. And I wanted to ask you about the linebackers because one of the things, and I'll take you all the way back to 2024 to Dublin, Ireland. People called me and RJ homers because we picked Georgia Tech to beat Florida State, and we highlighted one of the reasons we thought they were. And this was before we knew Florida State was a tire fire. But Florida State's linebacker play was like it was very substandard. And Buster Faulkner is one of the best offensive coordinators in the country, and the linebacker position is the absolute worst position to have as your weakness because of just how he can just line up and there's about 8 different plays that could happen in the same formation. Like it's he does such a great job of taking advantage of that kind of weakness, especially in the run game. So that's definitely something that I'm keeping an eye on. But I also think Colorado had one of the more underrated, cornerback and nickel rooms. Like I know Travis Hunter was incredible and was just a very good corner, but I think there were some guys there that didn't really get talked about enough and are very good as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll say DJ McKinney. He's going to be CU's top quarterback on Friday. Also, Preston Hodge at the nickel spot. I think he's going to be really solid. He's looking really good right now. At the second cornerback spot, still not 100% sure who's going to be there. Probably either Tion Parks or RJ Johnson. Maybe kind of a question mark there. But yeah, I would imagine overall CU might have a bit of an advantage, at least corners against Georgia Tech's wide receivers. Again, we'll see though.
Yeah. I mean, I'm interested to see because they did, of course, lose Eric Singleton to the transfer portal. He's at Auburn now, but they're sky high on Eric Rivers, the FIU transfer. Put up a lot of numbers. Now, of course, like we say a lot about a lot of these transfers, like it was at a lower level. So I'm interested to see how that translates. But he seems like a perfect fit. He's blazing fast. I think Buster is going to find ways to get him the ball. Malik Rutherford is extremely steady. Like he's going to make big plays. Very good with the ball in his hand, run after catch. And then Isaiah Canyon is the name I want to highlight here because Georgia Tech lacks a little bit of size at receiver. Like it's not like a humongous room, but Isaiah Canyon is a name to know. He brings size there. I guess it's a slight concern I have about offense, and I've talked about this on some other pods before, but Georgia Tech's tight ends are like extremely important in this offense just from a run blocking perspective. And Jackson Halls was one of the best ones in the country. Last year was a 5th-round draft pick of the Buffalo Bills. And me and RJ do this sometimes too when we're deciding the depth chart for the tight end. We just say it's going to be oars across the board. Like all these 4 of these guys are going to play, and that's what it was on Sunday. I just wonder if there's a drop off at all because of just how integral they were to the running game. But I guess RJ, like, what is your biggest concern with the matchup between Georgia Tech's offense and Colorado's defense?
Yeah, I am very confident in Georgia Tech's wide receivers, and I think that they have a very deep and very talented room. But DJ McKinney, to me, I mean, you see him across all of these preseason boards, all of these really high expectations. Some people would venture to say he's the best person on that Colorado defense. And if Georgia Tech is going to need to pass the ball, like if Georgia Tech ever gets behind in this game, obviously I think they're going to stick to their MO a lot of the time, which is run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. But if they ever get into the situation where they need to pass, Colorado's got a pretty strong secondary, in the cornerback room at least, that is. And that worries me a little bit, but I think as long as Georgia Tech, again, stick to their MO, run the ball a lot, option with Haynes and Haynes, I think they will be fine. But the big worry for me is if Georgia Tech ever does get behind in this game, I think they're going to have a lot more trouble coming back from a deficit than they will, expanding on a lead that they may have.
Yeah. So I guess I'll end this discussion with you, Jack. Kind of what's your biggest concern from the Colorado perspective going against the Georgia Tech offense?
Again, linebacker play. Just like picturing like Haynes King get out of the pocket and find the middle of that. That might scare me a little bit just with, again, Martavis French and Reggie Hughes, they were really solid at the lower levels, but again, got to see it in the Power 4 first. Linebacker play and maybe that second cornerback spot. As you mentioned, Georgia Tech's got some depth at wide receiver. If because McKinney's pretty locked down, so I would imagine Haynes King is going to go more to the other side of the field, and either Tion Parks or RJ Johnson is going to have a really good game. Yeah, so I'd say those two areas maybe a little worrisome.
All right, so Colorado wins this game if what?
Yeah, I think as you were saying, if they get off to an early lead, if it's like at least I would say like 10-0, 13-0, if they can somehow find a way to get off to an early lead before halftime, I think that will be really important to just force Haynes King into a passer, because at that point, I think CU overall in the secondary might have an advantage there. But if Georgia Tech gets the ball first, scores a touchdown, it's 7-0 early. Yeah, I would be a little worried, and yeah, just in terms of CU coming back from a deficit. If Georgia Tech, they just keep pounding the rock over and over again with a slight lead, yeah, I think it could be a tough day for the Buffs.
So you think a fast start is imperative. Like if
Yes.
Colorado wants to win this game, you can't see them winning a game in which they start slow.
Yeah. I think this game maybe it'll be decided in the first 20, 25 minutes before halftime. If CU's down 2 scores at halftime, it could be tough. Just for CU's defense to, really stop that run and give the offense, or keep the offense in the game at least.
All right. Well, we will get you out of here on this, Jack. All right. We're going to put you on the spot. Who wins the game?
Yeah, again, just because there's a lot of position groups where I need to see it first, see it in game action. I'll go Georgia Tech, maybe 31-24. That's going to be my final score prediction. Again, also goes Georgia Tech, and you guys bring back just so many key offensive players from last season, outside of maybe your wide receivers room a little bit. Jamal Haynes is really good too. So as of now, I guess I'll give Georgia Tech the slight edge, even though it's in Boulder.
Well, the people that watch this show, you have just become their favorite Colorado reporter, if you weren't already. We really appreciate it, Jack. You do fantastic work over at Colorado on SI. Everybody give Jack a follow on social media. We really appreciate him coming on. Yeah, man, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys, and I'll see you Friday.
I'll see you Friday. All right, RJ, let's bring this back, folks, because you've got to give your season predictions. You've been missing too much, and you owe us some things here. So I guess I'll kind of be brief on this because I talked about it, on the last pod. I actually have quite literally the same score as Jack. I was going to tell him that before he got out of here, but I do have it 31-24, and I agree with him. I think the start for both teams is important because, both teams are not I'm not saying they can't. Don't take this out of context, but I think both teams are going to be built to play with a lead, especially with just the way they want to run the football. And to me, it just comes down to I think Colorado could run the football. I know people will look at their numbers last year and just completely dismiss that. I think that would probably not be a good idea. It's just with so many new faces and their identity last year was just because they had such an elite receiving group and you had Shador, you were just going to throw the football. You weren't going to probably, even if you had, Quinshon Judkins or somebody back there in the backfield, he just wasn't going to get touches because they threw the ball so much. So I'm not going to be completely dismissive of the idea that they can run the ball, but I think I know Georgia Tech can. I know they can run the football against anybody. And the Colorado linebackers, I think that Georgia Tech, that's a big advantage. I don't think there's a bigger advantage that Colorado has than what Georgia Tech's run game could have against that group right there. And I think that that's going to decide the game.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why you see Georgia Tech favored pretty heavily in this game. As
no, actually,
right now I'm seeing it at 4.5, and again, that's on the road, week 1. I think that does actually hold a lot of weight, or it does to me at least. But I think a lot of that comes from this Colorado team is kind of incomplete. Pretty much every single position group, you're bringing a new guy in, or you're having a guy that didn't start last year start this year. And I think there's going to be a ton of uncertainty. And I think you really do put yourself in the position for a blowout. Now, for my prediction for this game, I'm gonna say that it's close, but I'm gonna say if a team is blown out by another team in this game, I think Georgia Tech will absolutely 10 out of 10 be the team that blows out Colorado. I don't think the Buffs have the firepower that they have last year. I don't think they have really close to the amount of same talent that they had last year, because if this year's Georgia Tech team played last year's Colorado team in week 1 in Boulder, I mean, I think we would both agree that Colorado would probably be favored in that game, and it would not be a Georgia Tech 4.5 spread. So I think there is a lot of optimism going into this game, but you have to go in there in the first half, and you got to prove it. You got to prove that you're the team that you were last year, and you got to prove that you can beat high level talent. And as we've seen on the rest of the schedule, you have 2 really hard games. You have a prove it game against Colorado. Every other game, and now Duke and some other opponents are very hard, but every other game is winnable. So I think, as a Georgia Tech fan, when you look at that schedule, like, if you win this Colorado game, there's a lot of good sledding coming.
Yep. And I want to go back to something you said earlier in the podcast, and because I made that point yesterday on another show, that it's kind of weird going against a team coached by Deion Sanders and you're the one getting the attention. Like, this is, and I try to just like focus on what's on the field, like advantages and this and that, and just try to like, okay, who's better? Like, who do I think's better? Who can have advantages in the game? But like, I do try to at least talk about some of the external factors. And one of the things I've written about this week was, okay, and Brent Key was asked about it, like, okay, how do you play with expectations? Because it hasn't always gone well for Georgia Tech when that's been the case. Like, they got ranked and then immediately lost to Syracuse. Like, and that Syracuse team was really good, and they like their strength really could attack Georgia Tech's weakness last year. But it's kind of been, the theme, like, okay, you have a little bit of success, like, you Key's first year, you beat Miami, and then you come back the next week and you lose to Boston College. Like, it's just finding that consistency. Now you got to start with it. Like, you're the team that's being talked about as a dark horse ACC title contender. You're the team that's being talked about as a dark horse college football playoff team. Does that affect you at all? Like, I don't know. Maybe it does, but I think we're going to find that out. And I'm not saying it can't affect them in other games, but like, I could see Colorado having a chip on their shoulder. Like, I don't think that's crazy at all, because, they're usually the team getting the attention and having everybody talk about them. But I think it's kind of at least in the college football, like, people that know and discuss college football, we're kind of expecting more out of Georgia Tech. So very interested to see how this plays out. I do think Georgia Tech wins. I do think Colorado has good players, and I do have a lot of respect for them, and I think it's going to be a close game. So I'll be there. I'm leaving tomorrow. I'm very excited to see it. But before we get out of here, RJ, since you've missed so much time, I do have to get you on record as having a season prediction. I ended up at 9-3. I had losses to Clemson, NC State, and Georgia. You can go watch me ramble for an hour if you want to know why. But kind of what are you thinking? How did the game shake out, and kind of what's your reasoning for it?
Yeah, and honestly, I've wrestled a lot with this, because when you talk about a Brent Key team, when you talk about a 2020s Georgia Tech team, there really is no certainty. Like, there's pretty much, you can lose to most of the teams on the schedule, besides the 2 teams that I'm not going to say, because full respect to those schools. But I think there's a lot of games on the schedule. Pretty much all of these ACC opponents are very, very tough opponents that you have to take serious. So I went a pretty similar route. I'm also at 9-3, with losses to Clemson and a loss to NC State. But I did differ from you a little. I am gonna take Georgia Tech in the Georgia game. I've been talking about it all off season. Georgia Tech seems to play Georgia great every single year. Some years they play Georgia better than really anybody else does. Obviously, you had that really thrilling game. I don't think Georgia is as good as they were last year. I think they're slightly worse. Again, still a very good team. But I'm going to take Georgia Tech in that one. And then I'm going to take Duke at home against Georgia Tech in the middle of the season as a loss for Georgia Tech. So I'm also at 9-3 with losses to Clemson, Duke, and NC State.
And that would be, because the thing is, like 9-3 is a good record, but I will also say if you're 5-3 in ACC play, like you're out of the title picture, like you're done. Like because I was talking about kind of ceiling and floors, and I said the floor. I would be surprised if they're worse than 7-5. I think 10-2 is probably the ceiling. Like if you really want to get aggressive, I could hear a case for 11-1. Like they split the Clemson Georgia games and then win the rest of them. Like I don't. It's in like the 1 percentile of outcomes, but like I don't think it's totally insane. Kind of what's your feeling on the floor and the ceiling for this group this year?
Yeah, and again, I really want to go 11-1 too, but it's also the fact that we haven't really seen them prove it. Just like you talked about earlier, they played from the underdog area a lot. They haven't been this hyped of a team, and I know they're not ranked in the top 25, but when you talk about preseason hype, Georgia Tech had a decent amount last year. They have a lot more this year than they did last year. You return one of the best quarterbacks in college football, and you have all of the eyes on you in a conference where not a lot of eyes are at. So I think Georgia Tech does face a pretty big challenge. As of right now, they're 9.5-point dogs to Clemson. And you see some other games back down on the schedule where you're going to be favorites in, I think, pretty much every game besides Clemson and Georgia. I could see them being underdogs against Duke and, maybe NC State if they're having a really good season. I don't see them being underdogs to Boston College, Wake Forest, any of those teams. But they're going to have to learn to play as the team that's supposed to go out and get the win. And we've seen that time and time again. It's been rocky, to say the least. And this has to be this is the transition year to me in the Brett Key tenure, where you have to move from, this underdog team, the ACC that could make some noise, they do an upset every year, to, yeah, Georgia Tech is a perennial ACC contender and they're a legitimate team that you should be scared of. And I think if not next year, if not whenever, I think now is the time that you have to make the transition. College football is as uncertain as it gets. You don't know if you're going to get a quarterback like Haynes King
As much
in
as
the near future.
Yeah,
And Aaron Philo is great too. But you probably have, I would venture to say, a top 5 quarterback in college football, and I think you got to capitalize on that. You got 2 hard teams in the schedule. I think you got to go out and win the rest of the games. Again, that's not my prediction. That's not what I think is going to happen. But to establish yourself as one of those ACC powerhouses, that's what you got to do.
Yep, I agree. Well, that's going to put a bow on this. That was a lot of fun. We really appreciate Jack coming on to give us some info about Colorado. Love talking football. Love talking about the game. Makes me, I guess, a little nervous. It's just Georgia Tech across the board, but we'll see what happens. Like I said, I will be there. We're going to do an instant reaction show as close to as soon as after the game ends on Friday night, and kind of just talk about what happened, whether it's a win or a loss or whatever. We would appreciate it if you would join us. So again, guys, if you're watching this, haven't subscribed to the channel yet on YouTube, would love it if you would do so. Give the video a like. Follow us wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a review over there. You guys have been awesome with all support all summer. We finally have some actual football to talk about, and we're going to love doing that. So appreciate all the support and everything. It means a lot to us, and we will see you on Friday.